side there of the fountain. It is basically the clothes from victims of sexual violence attached with a few wordings. Too often the narrative around sexual and gender-based violence turns to victim blaming. This in particular targets young women. Questions of what were you drinking, why were you there, what were you wearing are often asked. While often the questions are not asked via malice, this is often done to comfort the victims and to comfort themselves. They want to distance themselves or their loved ones from being vulnerable. This cannot happen to me, I don't drink. This happened to my daughter as she doesn't wear such clothes. People are reassuring themselves. However, the reality is that this can happen to anyone, in any place, even in our homes, at any stage of life. It is an issue for society, not just for young women or even just women, to flip the conversation and change our approach. And I hope this exhibition helps us start the conversation. Start the important conversation. You can reach out to my team member. She will be around. And you can also reach out to me if you have any questions. You can also join the online conversation under the hashtag #WhatIWasWearing. And please feel free to have a look at the exhibition. Just to re-emphasize, the clothes and the codes are directly from victims of sexual violence in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us to take a tour of the exhibition. It will be great to read the messages that are lined up there. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to recognize that from the Uganda Human Rights Commission, we have a representative of the chairperson, and that's Commissioner Jacqueline Atuhaire. A round of applause. The Uganda Human Rights Commission has been in the lead of this arrangement together with the United Nations. So we'll thank you so much, Commissioner, for the arrangement here. 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We've been running this. For many of you who attended the launch at Imperial Royal Hotel, since then we've been holding a couple of activities across the country. I know many meetings, symposiums, dialogues have been held within Kampala itself, but also there have been up-country-based activities, including media engagements and dialogues, sharing testimonies. And as we continue the 16 days, we encourage all of you to let us know on what is happening on your side, how you're carrying the flag of 16 days. Ladies and gentlemen, GBV remains a big dent in the aspirations of our development as a country because of the effects that it has that are short in terms of the short term and the long run. We've known that women and girls are the most affected by gender-based violence, and many times when you talk about gender-based violence, there will arise questions on why you're focusing on the women and girls. But the simple answer is that the women and girls are the most affected. And if we're talking about the women and girls being affected, we need to remember that women and girls are the majority of population in Uganda. So you would be talking about a subject that affects the majority of your population as a country. And if you're talking about effects of GBV that deter productivity, that actually could end one's life, then if it's affecting the majority of the persons in your country, then you have a cause to raise the flag high and ensure that that population is protected if you want to have a country that is advancing in growth and development. As we converge here today, we further this discussion, and it's good that we have a representation of the government here. We have a representation of the civil society. We have representation of the development partners. We have representation of the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, issues of sexual and gender-based violence come in different forms. And all of us interact with these situations, or we interact with people who have gone through these situations. And many times, the survivors are lost on where to go, where to find help. So it is our duty as duty bearers. You'll note that all of us are duty bearers. It's our duty to ensure that we are delivering information to persons who need them, but we also offer service that could help them overcome the challenges of sexual and gender-based violence. The Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is in the lead as the government lead agency in running the program on ending gender-based violence. And of course, it's been working with a couple of CSOs, partners, development partners in this cause. I know that in terms of social norms and traditions that are harmful in nature and negative, there's been a strong component that the ministry has been running with UNFPA, but I know that UNICEF is on board, and this program has thus far brought very, very encouraging results. Just the other day, we were in Sebei, Kwen district, where we were marking the Sabine Culture Day, and the MPs who represent the areas spoke very, very loudly with one voice against female genital mutilation. That was a score because there were many community members in attendance, including those traditional members who thought FGM is a practice that should be carried on. If we speak out, we influence. If you keep quiet, then the vice continues. So it's our role as a country, as leaders, as duty bearers, to speak out against gender-based violence, and that's the reason we're here. We can't stop talking because, yes, many of you will say, you know, we have had a couple of engagements on GBV, and it's enough. We still have the figures that are still daunting, and we need to ensure that those come down to zero. So as we discuss today, we shall be deliberating and coming up with key resolutions that could define how we move forward to end sexual and gender-based violence in Uganda. Allow me to recognize the arrival, well, it was a long time, of the UN Resident Coordinator, Her Excellency Susan Ngogi Namondo. A round of applause. You're most welcome. We also have from the US Embassy, Mr. David Skorsky. Most welcome, sir. So GBV, sexual and gender-based violence, is a cause for all of us to manage. It's not a responsibility of one entity, but a string of duty bearers who should be playing their role. And for me, I was very happy to see that in our midst we have the Uganda Police Force represented, as well as the Uganda Prisons Services. The police plays a key role because they are the first point that are approached by the survivors. And many times, if the police doesn't do its role, the survivors are almost condemned to go back to an area where they have been abused. So if the police plays a key role in ensuring that the cases are prosecuted, then we could have a deterrent to further exacerbation or further committing of gender-based violence. The Ministry of Gender, I know that, has been coming up with a number of policies and laws that protect women and girls against gender-based violence. And these need to be disseminated, replicated, so that our communities get to know them. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll be shocked to know that many communities up to now do not have much of the information that could be very useful to them when they're in these situations of sexual and gender-based violence. So it does good for us to join hands and improve on disseminating this information that we think can help our Ugandans come out of these situations. More is going to be shared during the discussions, and once the panel discussions are on, we shall be sharing the different inputs by the different partners. But for now, allow us have our first presentation, which is coming in from the Honorable Lady Justice Susan Okalan, who is online already. She's been holding online for the last 30 minutes. She's from the International Crimes Division of the High Court of Uganda, and she's going to be delivering a keynote presentation. The official opening will be done once the Right Honorable Speaker arrives here, and I'm informed that in a short while, the Right Honorable Speaker will be joining us. So, IT, can we please can we connect to our keynote speaker? The Honorable Lady Justice, if you hear me, good morning once again.
Hello.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Very good to have you here on this symposium. And we are privileged to listen to you delivering a keynote address. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just open my presentation. I did not expect to start according to your own program, but that's okay. I'm not informed about the persons that are represented, but since I had already included the names of according to the list of attendees, I'll just go through the protocol and recognize, at least I'm aware that the Speaker of Parliament is not there as yet. The Honorable Cabinet Ministers present, if any. The Honorable Justice Musa Sekana, representing the Principal Judge. Justices and judges of courts of judicature present. Members of Parliament. Her Excellency, their Excellencies, the country representatives of UN agencies, the heads of other international organizations present, the heads of criminal justice institutions and departments present, and the heads of government MDS present, who are not members of the criminal justice institutions, the chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Commission, the chairperson of the Leadership Code Tribunal, the chairperson, Legal and Parliamentary Committee of Parliament, the deputy chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Committee of Parliament, the Honorable Justice Ogola, PJ Emeritus, the Honorable Dr. Miriam Matembe, former Minister of Ethics and Integrity, representatives of political parties present, academicians, civil society leaders and representatives, representatives of victims of sexual and gender-based violence, members of the press, fellow combatants in the war against sexual and gender-based violence, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that list covers everybody. I do recognize and appreciate all of you who have attended this meeting. It was not my intention to be presenting online, but thank God for online or virtual technology that is enabling me to present to you today from Addis Ababa. My presentation has 7 issues. I can call it the outline of the presentation. It will have an introduction. I will also define SGBV, GBV, and violence against women and girls. I'll talk about types of gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence. I'll talk a little bit about achievements that have been registered by the criminal justice system. I'll make a few recommendations, which are not really my own personal ones, but recommendations that we have made before in fora such as this one. And then I'll conclude. SGBV continues to be a complex social phenomenon affecting mostly women and children. And most common SGBV crimes that we register in the criminal justice system are defilement, followed by rape at the high court level, and child labor, to name but a few. I'll be listing more of those crimes later on in my presentation. According to the Uganda Demographic Health Survey report of 2016, 22% of women aged 15 to 49 in Uganda have experienced some form of sexual violence. In response to the 2018 National Violence Against Children survey, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys reported having experienced sexual violence in the 12 months prior to the survey. So that reinforces the gendered aspect of sexual violence, particularly, in that more women and more girls are affected than men and boys. Police annual crime and traffic road safety reports indicate an increase in domestic violence. For instance, not just domestic violence, but all kinds of violence. But for instance, the report of 2021, last year's report, shows that 17,533 cases of domestic violence were reported to police. In 2020, a similar number was reported, 17,664. A slight increase, which doesn't mean anything. I mean, a slight decrease. It doesn't mean much because not all crimes are reported. Of the 17,533 victims of domestic violence, 3,000 were adult males, 12,800 were adult females, 871 were male juveniles, and 702 were female juveniles. In the category of defilement, 14,570 cases were reported in 2021, compared to 14,230 reported in 2020. For aggravated defilement, there was an increase of 1.6%, and defilement in related offenses. that is, that includes defilement and aggravated defilement. It was reported in 2020, the previous year, that there were 14,400 and, that is 16,000 rather, 545 victims of sex-related violence. And 14,000 of these 16,000 were female juveniles. 378 were males, 1,636 were female adults. Were males. Sorry. And this or sexual gender-based violence and gender-based violence is gendered. Although these police statistics show a high number of SGBV cases reported annually, most of these cases never get prosecuted in time, as demonstrated by the performance statistics of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, which show pending trial. In other words, they are investigated. They have been committed for trial in the High Court, for instance, but they are pending trial because of problems of caseload and backlog faced by the judiciary. So in the end, these cases become non-starter by the time they are cause listed. They get cause listed 3, 4, 5 years later. But by that time, victims or even accused persons will not be present for the trial because of change in circumstances of victims as well as accused persons. The effective prosecution of SGBV requires prior adequate investigation of the facts of the case. And that is problematic because of what we shall see in due course. It is important to note that not all SGBV offenses which is caused by fear of retribution, shame, powerlessness, lack of support. And I want to say with a lot of humility, unreliability of public services, among others. Even the current SGBV special sessions that are ongoing are reflecting these challenges. The courts are facing these challenges, particularly that cases have already been reported, investigated. Victims are fearing to come to court, or when they come, they get intimidated and don't give the evidence that they're supposed to do. But most importantly, it's recorded that they actually are not willing to testify anymore. It's a vicious cycle. To settle cases out of court, which is one of the major factors hindering efforts to eradicate SGBV. Similarly, the lack of training and sensitization of duty bearers, gender-insensitive trial procedures and environments, among other things, jeopardizes the effective prosecution of GBV. Notably, under the terms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the 1995 Constitution of Uganda, women enjoy the same rights and freedoms as men. They also enjoy autonomy, just like men. However, gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence, which includes domestic violence, is prevalent in our jurisdiction. And it is a flagrant transgression of the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as all those international instruments and the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. violence against women is a violation of the right to life, the right to liberty and personal safety. That is Article 3 of the UDHR, the right not to be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, Article 5 of that same declaration, the right to equality before the law and to equal protection under the law, Article 7 of the same declaration, of the right to a fair trial, Articles 8 and 10, of the right to freedom of movement and of freedom of assembly and association, Article 120 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. To name, among others, there are so many rights that are breached when gender-based violence or sexual gender-based violence is committed against an individual. It has now begun to be recognized that gender-based violence is a violation of the right to identity because it reinforces and reproduces the subordination of women to men, as well as leading to a distortion of the human being and of the right to affection, since violence is the opposite of any expression of love and affection, of the right to peace and enshrining enriching personal relations, since it's a negative form of dispute settlement, of a right to protection, since it creates a situation of defenselessness, not only in relation to the offending person or family member or member of the community, but also in regard to the state, which denies protection to women and society, which of course denies that the problem actually exists. You will hear discussions like, no. Even men suffer from GBV. The thing is equal. Total denial. It's like having a disease, COVID or HIV, and you say, I don't have it. It won't make a difference in terms of getting help if you keep denying the problem. So our society keeps pretending that SGBV is not there. It's very minor. It's a few people who are not proper, who might be committing it. It's not true that it is committed against women more than it is committed against men. In other words, it's not true that it disproportionately affects women. Of course, there are other rights, the right to personal development, because victims suffer from psychological paralysis and many kinds of suffering, which is, in my view, has reached pandemic proportions. And once that child is defiled, that is, they cannot reach their highest potential in life, because they will be treated like a woman who has become pregnant, is now mature, should go to the next step, which is to get married, etc. So international human rights law lays down obligations which the states are bound to respect. By becoming a party to international treaties, Uganda has assumed obligations and duties under international law to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights. The UNHCR commissioner says that the obligation to respect means that states must refrain from interfering with or curtailing the enjoyment of human rights. It also means, the obligation to protect requires states to protect individuals against human rights abuses. The obligation to fulfill means that states should take positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of basic rights. So the government of Uganda shoulders social and political responsibility for acts committed by third parties. If it does not take relevant measures to prevent, investigate, and punish acts of violence. In other words, the government of Uganda, which includes the Parliament of Uganda, the judiciary of Uganda, and the executive arm of government, are complicit to these acts of sexual gender-based violence that are being committed en masse in our society. We are all guilty. And the state becomes a de facto accomplice if it does not offer the necessary protection.
Recording stopped.
Of those violations. Or if it acts in a discriminatory fashion by not preventing or punishing those acts. Now, human rights are indivisible, and it is impossible to recognize and defend some of those rights and neglect others. Women's rights, children's rights should receive the same attention as the rest of the rights and should be considered in conjunction with those regarded as being the most pressing rights. Like we are talking about economic rights right now. It's on the agenda, and that is important because women benefit, children benefit if those rights are implemented. But those rights must be implemented hand in hand with human rights. In other words, with the protection of victims or the community from perpetrators of sexual and gender-based violence. Now, sexual and gender-based violence, SGBV, gender-based violence, GBV, violence against women, are similar terms that are usually used interchangeably, although violence against women is a more specific term than gender-based violence, as it applies to only women or those persons who identify themselves as female. According to the UNHCR, SGBV refers to any act perpetrated against a person's will. It is based on gender norms and unequal power relations. It includes physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual violence, and the denial of resources or access to services. It also includes threats to violence and coercion, and inflicts harm on women, girls, men, boys, and it is a severe violation of human rights. The World Health Organization defines sexual violence as an attempt to obtain a sexual act, unwanted sexual comments, or advances against a person's sexuality using coercion by any person, regardless of their relationship with the victim, in any setting, and including, but not limited to, home or work. The International Conference of the Great Lakes Region's Protocol on the Prevention and Suppression of Sexual Violence against Women and Children defines sexual violence as any act which violates sexual autonomy and bodily integrity of women and children under international criminal law, which includes rape, sexual assault, causing grievous bodily harm, assault or mutilation of a female's reproductive organs, sexual slavery, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, harmful practices inclusive of behavior and attitudes or practices such as the right to life, health, dignity, any behavior or attitude that excludes those rights. Exploitation, that is sexual exploitation, coercion, trafficking in persons, smuggling in persons. Actually, it says trafficking and smuggling in women and children. It's very specific on women and children. Enslavement, forced abortion, infection of women and children with STDs, including HIV, and any other form of sexual violence. So the protocol, the Great Lakes Region's Protocol on sexual suppression of sexual violence is broader, although the categories of sexual violence listed therein are not conclusive. Violence against women is defined in Article 2 of the UN General Assembly Declaration on Human Rights to encompass physical violence, sexual violence, that is committed, and other forms of violence including marital rape, female genital mutilation, or traditional practices that are harmful to women. It also includes physical sexual violence that occurs. The first category occurs in the family, and the second category of physical and sexual violence occurs in the community. And the third category is physical sexual violence perpetrated and condoned by the state. And it is common knowledge, we see it every time in the press, that violence is committed against the state. Police officers assaulting people in public, beating up women, contrary to the law, which they are supposed to implement, because they are faced with certain circumstances. And in most cases, at least the way I see it, the persons that they are battering are actually not armed. Violence is a means of control and oppression that can include emotional, social, economic force, coercion, or pressure, as well as physical. To be covert in the form of intimidation, threats, persecution, deception, psychological or social pressure. Now, I'll just list the types of sexual and gender-based violence or gender-based violence. Actually, our policy, as developed by the Ministry of Gender, uses the nomenclature of GBV and not SGBV. But basically, it's the same thing. I think the kind of response that particular government, now there are 5 kinds of sexual and gender-based violence. The first kind is sexual violence. The second kind is physical violence. The third kind is emotional and psychological violence. The fourth kind is harmful traditional practices Yes, I'll go to list a little bit about the kinds of sexual violence. We have rape, I mentioned that one, which is and marital rape. Marital rape is partly criminalized in our Domestic Violence Act, but most people don't know. They think that marital rape is not criminalized. It is actually criminalized. So there is a need to sensitize victims more on that one. Although I wonder whether many women will come up to accuse their husbands of marital rape, especially when they are not prepared to leave that relationship. Then we have, I'm not going to define rape, but generally it's understood to be in our penal code, the penetration, sexual penetration. It's not broad like it should be. It's not progressive, as it does not involve different kinds of penetration and objects used in the process. It does not also include anal rape. As we now know, men can also be victims of rape, especially in times of conflict. Then we have child sexual abuse, wherein we have defilement and incest. Then we have forced sodomy, attempted rape, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, forced prostitution. I know that prostitution, voluntary prostitution, is also criminal in our penal code, although it is very gendered in that it is women when they are arrested, and the other party to the prostitution it remains unknown. Sexual harassment, crimes, sexual violence as a weapon of war, physical physical assault. We have trafficking. Trafficking persons can also be sexual. We have any offense that causes humiliation. It can be verbal, non-sexual, insulting, degrading, demeaning. We have also in the category of emotional violence, confinement, isolating a person from harmful traditional practices, FGM, early marriage, forced marriage, and these ones are happening every day. Even as we have, SGBV has a lot of consequences. The World Health Organization has listed them as physical, psychological, socioeconomic consequences. You will look at it in my Uganda register in its fight against SGBV. There are some achievements at the legislative front. Uganda is a signatory of various international and regional instruments and has domesticated the principles in those instruments in its laws. Of course, by virtue of being a member of the UN, we are bound to uphold the provisions of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It is legally binding. I will not go into all those details. There are key international instruments that we have acceded. The CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which provides for equality of status and legal rights for women. It obligates states to eliminate discriminatory or harmful practices that affect women, and this implicitly includes SGBV. We have also ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This one provides that all persons are equal before the law. They are entitled to equal protection of the law without discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, political opinion, and other factors. It mandates for effective remedies for persons whose freedoms have been violated. And the term there is effective remedies. We have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, providing for between men and women is done freely by consent of both parties. It's not supposed to happen via defilement of children or in any other way. The Convention on the Rights of the Child protects children and recognizes that some children live in extremely difficult situations and require special protection. The UN Security Council Resolution 1325 calls for adoption of a gender perspective and consideration of special needs of women and girls during conflict. Then the Security Resolution of the UN number 1820. It condemns the use of sexual violence as a tool. We have ratified international instruments, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Maputo Protocol, which gives access by women to judicial legal processes. The African Charter, the International Conference of the Sexual Violence, which I have mentioned before. I could sit here for 1 hour listing the regional, national, and international instruments that protect human rights and that fight or that we are supposed to apply in combating sexual gender-based violence. But we don't have the time to listen to all that. I could list the policies that the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development have created or come up with towards fighting gender-based violence? There are too many. Of course, domestically, I said Uganda has one of the most progressive constitutions, 1995, that protects women's rights. Under Chapter 33, we have the Penal Code Act, the Domestic Violence Act and regulations, the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act, which makes FGM an offense, the Children Act, the Police Act, which gives the police the right to arrest anyone who commits SGBV in the society, the Trafficking in Persons Act, the Employment Act, the Equal Opportunities Act, and members of the Equal Opportunities Commission are not here accidentally. And the National Equal Opportunities Policy, the ICC Act, which is the act that we apply at the International Crimes Division. All these instruments reaffirm Uganda's commitment to respecting and upholding fundamental human rights and freedoms, equality of men and women. The principles contained in international and regional and domestic instruments put Uganda among the 13 countries whose constitutions have explicit guarantee for equality of all citizens and non-discrimination between men and women. Now, I'm not going to look at the policies anymore, but I have them in the paper, including, of course, the CEDAW. Including the CEDAW. I'm not going to bore you with those. But I will just say some about the Constitution. It stipulates for equality before the law in all spheres of political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Among the most important aspects of the Constitution is equality. No person shall be subjected to any form of torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Marriage can be entered into with the free consent of a man and a woman intending to marry, provided they have reached 18 years. That is so clear and categorical. But when we see children married off at the age of 12, we wonder why, what is happening. It's because our communities, our laws have not understood the provisions of the Constitution, these progressive provisions. They are still applying archaic, outdated, and retrogressive cultural norms and practices. Additionally, the Constitution says laws, cultures, customs, and traditions which are against the dignity of or interests of women, or which in any way undermine their status, are prohibited. So nobody should be discussing and religious fights for equality and human rights. Concerning the CEDAW itself, in violence against women, the control of trafficking the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act, and the International Criminal Court.
Sorry, Justice, we're having a disruption in the network. We're having a disruption in the network. Lady Justice, you could probably wind this up. The network is not being so friendly. IT, is she still there? IT team? She's off. Okay, sorry about that. But ladies and gentlemen, for now, let's give Honorable Lady Justice a round of applause. She's spoken passionately and in depth into the legal provisions on all those provisions that touch issues of gender-based violence. She's done a good job to bring us to speed with those laws, policies, and actually, in essence, she was challenging all of us, including government, to play our roles. She talked about sex-related offenses, and as I was checking through the annual crime report by police for 2021, there were up to 16,373 cases that were reported. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a very high figure, 16,373. And of those, 14,482 were female. So you could imagine that most of the people being affected by these cases are the women and the girls. And that's the reason why we need to raise the flag on sexual and gender-based violence, especially against women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, if we get time to get back to the Honorable Lady Justice there, we shall. But for now, allow us delve into the opening remarks for this symposium. And I take now this honor and rare opportunity to invite our first speaker for this morning, who is representing the chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Commission. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Jacqueline Atuhaire to deliver remarks on behalf of the chairperson.
Good morning, everybody. The Right Honorable Speaker of Parliament, UN heads of agencies, representatives from the civil society organization, private sector, academia, traditional and religious leaders, media, distinguished guests, ladies. I'm here to deliver this speech on behalf of my chairperson of Uganda Human Rights Commission, and my name, like they say, Atuhaire Jacqueline. On behalf of the Uganda Human Rights Commission,